Yes, I have loved you with an everlasting love, an everlasting love, an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness have I drawn you, drawn you, drawn you.
Okay.
Hello, this is episode 25, and it's entitled Easter-anity. Now, you probably wonder why it has a title like that. Well, think about Christianity, but then think about what Christianity has come to mean at Easter time. So, what is Easter? Is it a once per year celebration of Christianity? Is it a time once a year to visit a church, which you don't bother to visit most other Sundays, if at all, throughout the year? Is it a time to buy new clothes and put on a fashion show at a building to see who looks the nicest? Okay, in fact, what is any Sunday morning besides Easter, even if you do attend church regularly? Is it a mini Easter Sunday fashion show to look your best in order to show others that you respect God, who supposedly lives in a church building, but who will be offended if you don't look perfect on Sunday mornings, but won't be quite as offended if you attend the more casual meetings at the building, dress more casually at other times besides Sunday morning? Are we performing for God or for others? Do we think God would be insulted if we don't follow all the traditions? Didn't God invent the traditions? How did it get started? Well, I'm going to read a portion out of a book called Pagan Christianity, which talks about this tradition of dressing in our best clothes on Sunday mornings. And then you'll see how Easter Sunday morning has become like the epitome of this tradition. Okay, now, this book talks a lot about where these traditions start that we get for celebrating Christianity in different ways, and the history of it. Because I used to wonder, well, why is this a tradition? I never saw that in the Bible, that you're supposed to dress up a certain way on Sunday mornings. But this book, Pagan Christianity, has really opened my eyes to a lot of things and answered a lot of my questions. Every Sunday morning, millions of Protestants throughout the world put on their best clothes to attend Sunday morning church. But no one seems to question why. Hundreds of thousands of pastors wear special garb that separates them from their congregants, and no one seems to care. Admittedly, the dress has become more casual in a number of churches over the past few decades, A person dressed in denim can walk into the sanctuaries of many churches today without getting dirty looks. Yet dressing up for church is still a common practice in many churches. In this chapter, we will explore the origin of dressing up for church. We will also trace the roots of the clergy's special attire, although I'm probably not going to go to that part of it this time. In fact, I think the things we need to share today, we may have to do in two segments, because there's some other aspects of Easter that I want to touch on too. With Easter coming, I think we need to be a little bit more aware of some things. Dressing up for church. The practice of dressing up for church is a relatively recent phenomenon. It began in the late 18th century with the Industrial Revolution, and it became widespread in the mid-19th century before this time. Let's see. Oh, this began sense. Before this time, dressing up for social events was known only among the very wealthy. The reason was simple. Only the well-to-do aristocrats of society could afford nice clothing. Common folks had only 2 sets of clothes, work clothes for laboring in the field, and less tattered clothing for going into town. Dressing up for any occasion was only an option for the wealthiest nobility. From medieval times until the 18th century, dress was a clear marker of one's social class. In places like England, poor people were actually forbidden to wear the clothing of the, quote, better people. This changed with the invention of mass textile manufacturing and the development of urban society. Fine clothes became more affordable to the common people. The middle class was born, and those within it were able to emulate the envied aristocracy. For the first time, the middle class could distinguish themselves from the peasants. To demonstrate their newly improved status, they could now, quote, dress up for social events just like the well-to-do. Some Christian groups in the late 18th and early 19th centuries resisted this cultural trend. John Wesley wrote against wearing expensive or flashy clothing. The early Methodists so resisted the idea of dressing up for church that they turned away anyone who wore expensive clothing to their meetings. The early Baptists also condemned fine clothing, teaching that it separated the rich from the poor. This all came to a head when in 1843, Horace Bushnell, an influential congregational minister in Connecticut, published an essay called Taste and Fashion. In it, Bushnell argued that sophistication and refinement were attributes of God and that Christians should emulate them. That reminds me of, I've heard people say that phrase, well, cleanliness is next to godliness, and they think that's in the Bible, but it's not. It's just a little saying that people come up with. Thus was born the idea of dressing up for church to honor God. So it supposedly honors God. Church members now worshiped in elaborately decorated buildings, sporting their formal clothes to honor God. In 1846, a Virginia Presbyterian named William Henry Foote wrote that a, quote, church-going people are a dress-loving people. This statement simply expressed the formal dress ritual that mainstream Christians had adopted when going to church. The trend was so powerful that by the 1850s, even the formal dress resistant Methodists got absorbed by it, and they too began wearing their Sunday best to church. Accordingly, as with virtually every other accepted church practice, dressing up for church is the result of Christians being influenced by their surrounding cultures. Today, many Christians, quote, suit up, unquote, for Sunday morning church without ever asking why. But now you know the story behind this mindless custom. It is purely the result of 19th century middle-class efforts to become like their wealthy aristocrat contemporaries, showing off their improved status by their clothing. This effort was also helped along by Victorian notions of respectability. It has nothing to do with the Bible, Jesus Christ, or the Holy Spirit. So what's wrong with it? What's the big deal about dressing up for church? It is hardly a burning issue. However, it is what dressing up for church represents that is the burning issue. First, it reflects the false division between the secular and the sacred. To think that God cares one whit if you wear dressy threads on Sunday to, quote, meet him, is a violation of the new covenant. We have access to God's presence at all times and in all circumstances. Does he really expect his people to dress up for a beauty pageant on Sunday morning? Second, wearing attractive, flashy clothes on Sunday morning screams out an embarrassing message that church is the place where Christians hide their real selves and, quote, dress them up, unquote, to look nice and pretty. Think about it. Wearing your Sunday best for church is little more than image management. It gives the house of God all the elements of a stage show: costumes, makeup, props, lighting, ushers, special music, master of ceremonies, performance, and the featured program. Dressing up for church violates the reality that the church is made up of real people with messy problems. Real people who may have gotten into a major league bickering match with their spouses just before they drove into the parking lot and put on colossal smiles to cover it up. Wearing our, quote, Sunday best, unquote, conceals a basic underlying problem. It fosters the illusion that we are somehow good because we are dressing up for God. It is a study in pretense. It is a study in pretense that is dehumanizing and constitutes a false witness to the world. Let's face it, as fallen humans, we are seldom willing to appear to be what we really are. We almost always rely on our performance or dress to give people a certain impression of what we want them to believe we are. All of this differs markedly from the simplicity that marked the early church. Third, dressing up for church smacks against the primitive simplicity that was the sustaining hallmark of the early church. The first century Christians did not dress up to attend church meetings. They met in the simplicity of living rooms. They did not dress to exhibit their social class. In fact, the early Christians made concrete efforts to show their absolute disdain for social class distinctions. In the church, all social and racial distinctions are erased. The early Christians knew well that they were a new species on this planet. For this reason, James levels a rebuke to those believers who were treating the rich saints better than the poor saints. He boldly reproves the rich for dressing differently from the poor. And yet many Christians are under the false delusions that it is irreverent to dress in informal clothing when attending a Sunday morning church service. This is not dissimilar to how the scribes and the Pharisees accused the Lord and his disciples of being irreverent for not following the traditions of the elders. In short, to say that the Lord expects his people to dress in fine clothing when the church gathers is to add to the scriptures and speak where God has not spoken. Such a practice is human tradition at its best. Now, I read all that because I also wanted to back that up with the scripture in James that it was referring to. And I'm going to be reading in James chapter 2 on just a few verses. Okay. Chapter 2. My dear brothers and sisters, how can you claim to have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people over others? For example, suppose someone comes into your meeting dressed in fancy clothes and expensive jewelry, and another comes in who is poor and dressed in dirty clothes. If you give special attention and a good seat to the rich person, but you say to the poor one, you can stand over there or else sit on the floor, well, doesn't this discrimination show that your judgments are guided by evil motives? Listen to me, dear brothers and sisters. Hasn't God chosen the poor in this world to be rich in faith? Aren't they the ones who inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? But you dishonor the poor. Okay, and then I'm going to skip down to 9 and 10 here, verses. Let's see, 8, 9, and 10. Yes, it is. Yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in the scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. But if you favor some people over others, you are committing a sin. You are guilty of breaking the law. So, that makes it pretty clear that tradition to dress up on Sunday morning and then ultimately on Easter Sunday morning, as if that's the epitome of Christianity. Like I said, there are people that don't even attend church the rest of the year. But it's a big tradition for people to go to church anyway on Easter Sunday. And I'm going to mention this quickly, but I think we're going to deal with this some more next podcast for part 2. But the churches, if you'll notice, a lot of churches, even some that usually don't reach out to people throughout the year, have you noticed that you'll get all kinds of mailings in the mail just before Easter, but from different churches saying, come to our church. And everybody wants you at their church, and they compete over how many people they can get to their church on Easter Sunday morning, because that's traditionally the time when people come, even if they don't come the rest of the year. And so the churches are taking advantage of that and saying, well, yeah, we don't want you going over there. We want you to come to our church. And so we have a bigger crowd. So we look good. And who knows? Maybe partly so that more people will put money in the offering at their church. Mm-hmm. And I want to deal more with that the next podcast about how churches compete. But right now I wanted to emphasize that part of Easter that people just automatically assume that's the thing to do. That you've got to dress up and you've got to look a certain way. Otherwise, you're not considered worthy of coming to church on Sunday morning because you're dishonoring God. And people get funny ideas of what it means to not dress a certain way because they think that God's needs to be impressed with how they dress. Like God's never seen us without our clothes.
Yeah, God knows what we look like naked.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of created us that way, and we're kind of all born naked.
Yeah.
Not that you should go to church naked or anywhere else, but the point is, we're not doing it to impress God. And there have been people that I have known in churches that not only make a big deal out of what people look like when they come to church, but at this one church, they were talking about in one of the Sunday school classes about, some people wear this or that to church, and this one woman said, well, when I see people in shorts or hats in church, I can't worship God. And I was sitting there thinking, you know what, woman? You got a really bad relationship with God. If you can't worship Him, as long as other people are not wearing the clothes you think they should be wearing, there's kind of something wrong with that picture. So anyway, I can think of lots of examples about that. And I think Chastity has some examples she might want to share too about that.
Yeah. First of all, see, people's clothing was a status symbol about how wealthy they were, which is ironic now because now that people can get some of the nicest clothes from a thrift store than somebody else didn't want anymore. It's like nobody. It doesn't serve the purpose of knowing who's rich or poor anyway.
Right.
But second of all, there's the wrong motivation. Like you said, they want to get everybody in their church so they start giving their offerings there and get money off of them. So,
and everything has to look a certain way.
Yeah.
And they're not just trying to impress God, supposedly, but they're trying to impress other people.
Yeah.
In fact, I wasn't going to share this at first, but part of why God put this on my heart to talk about this just before Easter, I didn't know for sure if we were supposed to do one about Easter or not, but I happened to see a movie, and it wasn't about Easter, but it was about churches that try to dress up and have everything all fancy and perfect. They were expecting a new pastor to come into town. So they were trying to impress the new pastor by having a special occasion with lots of food and have everything just perfect and flower arrangements, and everybody was dressing up, spick and span and trying to be very impressive for this new pastor. Well, the new pastor, he wanted to see what this church was really like. They had never met him yet, and he knew he was supposed to come soon. And they had even put a banner up, say welcome, to the new pastor, and so they were all excited about impressing this new pastor. Well, the pastor was visiting the town, and he wasn't ready to introduce himself to the congregation yet. And he was actually staying at a motel. And he got the idea, since they hadn't seen him yet, that he would first come undercover and pretend to be a poor person. And he dressed all raggedy and even had an old broken down Bible. I mean, he didn't even bother to take a shower, and he put dirt under his finger. So he was looking pretty messed up, like somebody who might come that might be homeless. Well, those people, they didn't know he was actually a new pastor in disguise. And they were so intent on impressing the new pastor when he came that they treated this guy terrible. And only one person was even encouraging him to be a part of anything, and she was a new Christian. She'd only been a Christian for about 3 months, so she was new to the church, and she just wanted to be nice to everybody. But all the people who'd been there forever, were so used to having all the uppity people and trying to pretend to be holy and perfect. And all they cared about, they saw this guy there, and they kept whispering to each other, well, we don't want him here when the new pastor comes, because it's going to make our church look bad. So they had no idea that he was the new pastor, and he was in disguise. Well, then later, when he came back, he got all cleaned up and put on his own, suit and everything, whereas he was wearing real raggedy stuff at first. And anyway, so then he cleaned up, and then he brought his new stuff. So most of the people didn't even recognize him when he came in, and then they realized, oh, he's the new pastor and everything. Well, he got up to speak, and he explained to them what he had done. Fortunately, he told them part of the reason he did it was because he wanted to find out what that congregation was like, because he didn't feel like he could lead that congregation unless he knew what was going on, and he wanted to know how to help them and help them grow. So he didn't condemn them in any way, but he pointed out, look, this is something we really need to work on. And he asked people that wanted to come up and pray, and just to pray to God, asking God to help them to, have a better attitude. Well, almost everybody in that church did, even some of the leaders that had been kind of shunning him. Anyway, and so they got turned around, and he was able to help them to grow and have a better attitude. So that story turned out well in the end. But it just shows you this kind of thing happens a lot. And people automatically think, well, we don't want that person around. And they're forgetting all about the love of God. And so I wanted to bring that part of it up because with Easter coming, there's a lot of pressure to try to be holy by looking a certain way. And I felt like that's what we were supposed to talk about. And like I said, there's some other things about Easter that I think I want to share. Maybe we'll have a part 2 about this one. But I named it Easter-anity because it's part of Christianity that was made up to celebrate on Easter. So now I'm going to let you talk some more for a while.
Yeah, well, see, it's so contrary to everything Jesus was about, because the whole thing was treating people as equals, and he spent time with the so-called outcasts and sinners, and all his first disciples were poor people.
Yeah,
fishermen, prostitutes, like everybody that was seen as outcasts, and So when people start just being like, oh, well, everybody's got to look pretty in their fancy clothes and be rich and everything, it's just completely opposite of everything Jesus was about, and it's weird because as you were talking about it, I was thinking about the way, how at Walmart, so they had this meeting where all these district managers were going to come to the store I work at, and they were trying to get everything looking perfect, and they even had people who normally work during the daytime. They were having them work overnight. So everybody was trying to get every part of the store looking as perfect as it can before all these district managers come in. And I said to my coworkers, I said, you know what? We're just lying to the corporate people. We're just lying to the corporate managers here, basically trying to make this store look like something it never looks like, even for our customers any other day. And we do our best we can anyway, but we're understaffed, obviously. Yeah. But I just thought it was so weird that people were just exhausting themselves trying to make it look pretty for a short time while all these people were there, because they didn't want them to know what the store looked like the rest of the time.
Yeah.
And what that pastor did that you were talking about, how he pretended to be like some poor homeless person, it reminds me of something that would happen at Hy-Vee. Now, Walmart may do this too, where they would have these secret shoppers. They would just pretend to be some customer that needed help with something. And so you didn't know what they were. They just dressed like a regular customer, and they would ask a random employee for help with something, and they would be able to find out, okay, how helpful and friendly were the employees in the store?
Yeah. By
just pretending to be some pitiful person who couldn't find something, And it's funny because then, based on that, these people who were really managers from some other place, they review people on what they found out about that store, and they say, well, this store needs to improve this, because if this employee was rude, it's like, well, you need to do something about this. And so it was the exact same thing where somebody's going undercover and pretending to be something like that.
And didn't you get chosen for really good reviews?
I got 3 times. I got 100% reviews 3 times.
Yeah.
And what was so strange about it is that's because no matter which department I was working in at the time, in all my years I worked at Hy-Vee, I treated everybody the same.
Yeah.
It didn't matter whether they were young or old, or rich or poor, or whether they couldn't walk, or even blind and deaf people I helped. There's all kinds of different people that I served, when I worked there. And it's this idea that we treat people differently based on their status or their wealth or how they're dressed is a very strange thing.
Uh-huh.
Because, and another example where we see this level of dishonesty is, how people, when they're trying to date somebody and be romantic and all that, how they will try to make themselves look better. They'll try to make their clothes fancy, or clean their car, make their car look all nice, or get a new car or whatever. Like, they try to impress people and be something they're not. Mm-hmm. And then they get a relationship with this person, and then they find out what that person is really like in their day-to-day life, and realize the person they fell in love with wasn't even real.
Yeah.
And I think this is a reminder that we need to be real who we are. And if the way that you are is how you are all the time, and that's the way you are, that's fine. And not everybody is the same. But when people try so hard to impress people with the way they dress or the way they talk or whatever it is, it's dishonest. And I think that's what I dislike about it the most. Mm-hmm. This pretending to be something you're not.
Yeah. Well, now it seems to me, we know that's the kind of world we live in, but it seems to me that people who claim to represent Christ would want to act more like him and not treat people like that. We're not representing the way Jesus was. Just like in the book of James, it said, if you love your neighbor as yourself, you wouldn't treat people like that. And that's the whole problem. It's one thing to see people out in the world playing these kind of lying games and trying to pretend to be something they're not. But people who are followers of Christ, and they're worried about dishonoring him by not dressing a certain way to church.
Mm-hmm.
What about dishonoring him by treating people like this and showing favoritism like that and acting like some people are more important than others? We've talked about this a lot because we've talked about how Jesus said, don't any of you try to act like you're better than somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
That's what his whole message was. He didn't want his people to be like that. And yet people have all kinds of excuses for acting like they're of a better class. They're more important than other people, and everything has to look a certain way. And then criticizing other people for, the way they dress or whatever. I'm going to give one more little story, too, because when Chastity, who was Chandler at the time, was my little boy, we were going to this church in this town, and we were pretty poor at that time. We didn't have a lot of good clothes. And like it was in the summertime, and all Chandler had to wear were like some shorts. They were clean shorts, but it was summer, and so we were dressed neat and clean, but we weren't dressed up in a particular way. Well, these two older ladies, we were sitting toward the front of the church. It was before like the Sunday school, but people were out in the sanctuary for a while, and these two elderly women were sitting a little bit further behind us. And I heard them talking about, well, I just don't think it's appropriate for people to come to church in shorts. And we're just sitting there talking about us. And I got up and I walked over to them. And I said, I hope you're not talking about us. Because I said, you should be glad we're even here. And just because we don't have the clothes you think we should wear to church, I just called them on it. And there happened to be a man visiting that Sunday from Nigeria. And he was wearing his long clothing, African type dress or whatever. And he overheard the whole thing. Well, then we went on downstairs so Chandler could go to his little class, and I went to my Sunday school class. And later on, this guy from Nigeria came down, and he said, after you went down there, I talked to those women. I told them that's not right. And see, he came from a different culture where they appreciated God, and they cared about people. And they wore a different type of clothing anyway, but he noticed the whole thing and how these women just all they cared about was criticizing us being there, and we weren't dressed the way they thought we should. And so he called them on that too, because, and ordinarily I wouldn't be that bold, but I thought, you know what? They're right there talking about us, and they don't care a thing about us. They're not glad that we're here. Well, I just don't think it's, appropriate for church. And this appropriate for this or that, that's all people's pride. And their thinking, their worldly way of thinking, and hanging on to traditions to make them feel more important. And this man totally backed me up, and I hadn't known him before, but he came and told me that he told them this just isn't right to treat people like this. So I don't know, that story came back in my mind too, because I think people can see themselves or other people that have had that attitude. They don't care about the people that are coming to their church, but they're just analyzing how they're dressed and being critical. And we're not like animals in a zoo to be observed and say, oh, look at that monkey and look how it looks. No, we're people that are supposed to, the family of God is supposed to welcome everybody.
Yeah. That being said, if you want to look at weird looking animals, you should go to church.
Speak for yourself. Anyway, yeah, and we've talked before about there's no such thing really as going to church. We are the church.
Mm-hmm.
If we're followers of Christ. Now, like I've said before, if people feel like they're supposed to be a part of a congregation that does meet in a church building, then that's fine. If that's where God wants them to be.
Mm-hmm.
But when they start idolizing the building or their status among the people in that building, then they're missing the whole point of what the church really is.
Yep.
And if they're hiding behind their clothes to show the world how holy they are, how much God supposedly approves of them by how they look, there's a big problem with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because people, quote unquote, going to church has basically become a drag show. They're putting on a performance. See, they're dressing up with so much makeup and weird clothing and trying to put on a show and pretend to be some other thing. And here's the thing: it's even worse though, because they're doing it. Some of them are trying to impress people. Others, they just don't want people to look down on them and be mean to them if they don't look good enough.
It's like school bullies.
Yeah.
If kids are being made fun of, then they don't want to associate with that kid because they might get bullied too.
Exactly. If you hang out with the nerd that gets bullied by the bigger kids, then you'll get bullied too.
Mm-hmm. So we've got to really adjust our attitudes. We've got to pray and ask God to help us be the kind of people He wants us to be. Just like that church, when they realized what they did wrong, they did repent. And then it turned out really well because the pastor got a head start seeing what their problems were, so he knew how to help them. And it became a really good church with that pastor able to really help that congregation to grow, spiritually and in their attitudes and become a more loving church. And that's all we need to do. We just need to repent when we catch these bad attitudes we have. But if we just try to pretend, we're just so good, we don't need any correction, then we're still stuck in the same pattern.
Yeah. It's weird, and it's like, on the contrary, when people have these attitudes, it makes me think, I want to be as ugly as I can so I know who really loves me. Which is exactly why I include that advice in my first book.
Yeah. Chastity wrote a real funny first book.
Yeah.
And of all things, for somebody who's not even interested in sex because she's asexual,
right,
she was trying to give dating advice.
Yeah. Now there was a disclaimer in there that this advice will probably keep you single for life.
Yeah, well, and the name of it was Confessions of a Confused Virgin.
Yeah.
But it was really funny.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she was telling the girl, she was giving advice for men and for women. One of the advices she gave to the women is to make sure that person, really loves you and is going to treat you right and not just go for you because of how you look.
Mm-hmm.
She said, one of the things she told him to do, make yourself look as ugly as possible.
Yep.
So that's what she's quoting is that, and of course, a lot of that was meant to be funny, but there's a point there.
Yeah.
People try to impress, just like she was saying on dates and stuff. You don't know if people really love you for you or if they're just thinking, that looks like a nice thing to own.
Right. It's funny. But just like what that pastor was doing, he he made himself look as ugly as he could to see
Yeah.
if those people would still love him like they should.
And sure enough, there was only one person, a young Christian, that treated him with any kind of respect. And she was trying to apologize to him for how the others were acting. And yet she was the newest person in that church. She'd only been a Christian for 3 months. And the people who'd supposedly been Christians for years and years, they were treating this guy terrible. And she was the only one trying to be friendly and reaching out to him. And they were having like a potluck, and she made sure he got his food. And then they couldn't find a table to sit on because everybody was saving the seats that nobody was going to sit at anyway. They just didn't want him sitting there. So she found a little table off in the corner, and she sat down with him there. And she was embarrassed the way that he was being treated.
Well, yeah, and also, isn't this literally the same thing what Jesus did, where he comes in the lowest status possible? Basically, first of all, coming as a human is already a step down.
Yeah.
But to this poor couple, and it has to be born in a stable where all the animals are. See, interestingly, that, like, he put himself in the lowest status position to be somebody that nobody would take seriously by their wealth or status, according to the worldly standards, because Jesus was all about overturning these standards that people had depended on.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's beautiful because you know how I love the animals, and the idea that Jesus being born in a stable in Bethlehem like that, in a way it was kind of like Jesus saying, I'm one of these. You know, I'm with the animals. To me, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think most humans would understand that, but I see that.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, I mean, he didn't try to promote himself to look a certain way when, you know, or to try to compete with the famous or the rich. He made himself the lowliest he could because he was willing to sacrifice himself in life and death to help us to become what we could be.
Yep.
So, I think now maybe you can see why I named this Easter-anity.
Yeah.
Now, you could say it's like Easter Christianity, but I also was thinking, when I named it that, I was thinking, this is almost like Easter insanity.
Yeah.
So you can take it whichever way you want.
I think this Easter thing is its own religion entirely. It's its own separate religion.
Yeah, and it doesn't make any sense because what is Easter really supposed to be about? Mm-hmm. Isn't it about the resurrection of Christ? And yet, where in the Bible does it say that we're supposed to dress up to celebrate the resurrection of Christ? And I've seen churches go out of their way to prepare like Easter breakfast, anything to draw people in. And I've seen them doing these traditions and getting cranky with one another while they're preparing because they want to get all the people in there and they feel like they have to do this tradition and they have to impress everybody. And then they fight within themselves because they're under pressure to do all this stuff, extra work, to get up early on Easter Sunday morning. And they have like their sunrise services and they have their Easter breakfast and they have this and they have that. And they want to impress everybody and get everybody to their church. So it's nothing but a show. And that's not the right attitude at all. If they really love Christ and they really are thankful for his resurrection, there's no way they'd treat other people that way. There's no way they would treat each other in their congregation that way. And they wouldn't be greedy about getting everybody loyal to their particular church. Mm-hmm. I've seen churches compete. And to some extent, you can understand it when there's different denominations and they all think they're right. That's bad enough. But I've seen churches compete when there's more than one of the same denomination in that town and still fight over who goes to their church. So that can't have anything to do with what the denomination believes. It's all selfish and greedy and like, well, you have enough people over there. I want you over here. No. Somewhere we've gotten way off track to have that attitude at all, and that is not what Easter's about. So, I think that might be the end of part one. But there's more that we want to discuss about, Easter, and I want to go into more depth about this thing about churches wanting to compete with one another. There's so much wrong with that, and I have good scriptures that address those kinds of things as well. But I felt like we needed to just really emphasize the dressing up tradition, because people don't think anything of it. They're just mindless. Oh, it's Easter. Let's buy new clothes. Let's look good. And it's hard enough trying to impress everybody every Sunday morning to go to church and be under that pressure to rush off to church and look a certain way. But then once a year, it's, you have to look good, and you have to try to look better than somebody else. Boy, somewhere people have gotten way, way off of the plan of God by behaving that way.
Yep.
So, this has been kind of an interesting episode, but I felt like we needed to address it, and especially when it's probably on people's minds right now, because I'm already getting things in the mail this year, like I do every year, from church after church after church, all saying, come to our church, advertising, come to our church, don't come to our church. And some of these churches never reach out the rest of the time or show an interest in the people themselves. Let's just get as many people at our church.
Yeah.
Something isn't right. So anyway, this has been an interesting thing. Every single one of our episodes end up being a surprise to us until God shows us the week before. Because there's a lot of things God wants to say and point out. And we have to listen to Him to know what it is that people need to hear. And this just was a real strong message that needs to go out to make people really think about it and find out, what is my relationship with God? And how do I celebrate Easter? Do I just try to look a certain way for people? And what about people that come into the church that are really hurting and going through a lot and don't feel like anybody there cares about them? All they care about is their clothes.
Yeah.
That happens more than you could ever know. So, I think we kind of ended this on kind of a weird note, but
yeah.
Usually you have a joke at the end, but this is no joke.
Well, I already suggested people make themselves as ugly as possible, and nobody really loves it.
Well, that's true. And then the fact that God already knows what we look like.
Yeah.
With or without clothes. God doesn't care that we dress up to go to what's supposedly His house. Because we are His house. He lives within us if we know Him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just as silly as can be to think that we're dishonoring God if we don't have a perfect outfit to wear. Because doesn't God see us all the time and knows us, knows everything about us, and wants us all to love one another? So think about what the meaning of Easter really is, and don't treat it like it's just another chance to be phony.
Yeah, in all of this fashion show that people are doing, people have not really talked about, well, what does the resurrection of Jesus mean? Why is that significant? Because that gets lost in the big show with the clothes and the potluck or whatever they're doing.
Yeah, and see, one thing I've noticed, the people who never go to church, some people just go on Christmas or Easter, and the only thing they ever hear is how Jesus was born and then how he rose from the dead.
Yeah.
And they don't know anything else about Jesus.
Yep.
Because nobody's taken the time to help them understand any of it. So they hear the same stories over and over again. Every time they do go to church, it's always about the same thing. And they're going through this ritual, whatever the custom is for that particular church. And they're always hearing about his birth or his resurrection. And what about the rest of the message?
Surely something had to happen between the time that he was born naked and then he died naked on the cross and then resurrected.
Well, I think he was wearing something when he got resurrected, though.
I hope so.
Well, I mean, there were angels dressed in white, so I'm sure Jesus had something on.
I wonder where they get their clothes.
I'm not even going to go into that.
That's a whole nother podcast right there.
I guess, if we want to bother with that. Anyway, so, thanks for listening to us share our heart with you and hopefully sharing God's heart about how things really need to be. So,
Okay.
goodbye.
Bye.
Yes, I